welcome back. Part two. This week is going to be a lot more loose since we didn't cover everything we needed to last week. We're going to zip through some things. So we'll go over the animate panel a little bit more and easing and curves. We'll go through importing files, either sketch files or directly drag and drop. And then we don't have any audio or video files that I brought, but you can also do those. And then we'll go into drivers a little bit. And then pretty much the second half of this class today will be just everybody freely working on their own projects. So for, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes if we have the time. We'll see where we're at. And then the end of the class, we're going to do a little show and tell so we can each see what everybody else made. One of the coolest things in this is everybody does something different, which is why I like the Facebook community so much. Everybody's doing different things with it. So we'll do a smaller version of that with ourselves. So, you know, nothing wild, just whatever jumps out at you the most, we'll play around with that, and then I'll walk around and we can help each other out and see what we all make. So diving in, there was a couple of things I wanted to go through last week we didn't get to. So here I brought our cool app back up just because I'd added a panel soon after the class ended, which I thought is useful to see. So last week we had made two screens in the cool app. We had done this initial one here on the left, and we had done the larger content view on the right. What I added in is an event for scroll begins and for scroll ends. So all I had to do was select my layer here, click the event tab, and I choose scroll begin, and I actually just dragged it onto itself. So to duplicate the layer, I clicked it, dragged it onto itself, and it duplicated. The reason I did that is so that all the layer names would be the same, everything just duplicates. And then I went through, made my header 10 pixels instead of 50, and you can see I bumped the hamburger menu and the app name up. So all that does is, since it's the same layer name, it allows it to auto-animate. So on the right side here, when I start scrolling, it'll make the header really small. When I stop scrolling, it pops it back down. So this is just an auto event for our scrolling animation. It's pretty easy to create. We can also create this using drivers, which we'll get into a little bit later to give it a different feel. So now anytime it stops, it pops back down. With drivers, we can make it do pretty much anything we want at certain parts of the page. But I just thought this was another quick thing we could add into this little interaction we had created last weekend. And so then you can see I have the event here that's called scroll ends. And this is very different than scroll release, because as you can see in the app view, it waits until all the motion has stopped to bring the header back down. With scroll release, if I were to put that on instead of this, let me delete this and we'll add that event. So here I can come in, scroll release, brings us back over here. If I do that, should do it, but I put it on the wrong layer. There we go. Put it on the right layer, that works. So now as soon as I let go, the header pops back down. So I just wanted everybody to be able to see the main difference between those two events of scroll release and scroll ends. So one's based on pressure, the other one's based on the motion within the app. So it's pretty cool. That's all I want to show there. So the next one up, this is something that, since Mike sits next to me, he was asking me a question about at work this week. And that's with basically, with the paging last week, we were only showing the content that was in that page view. And I forget what we had seen, but it was some sort of card animation where it was giving it a hint that there's something next to it. You know, like you see, like Spotify does it, and a lot of these card swipes where you go left and right. do this kind of animation. So his question was, like what we have here on the right side of the screen. See, we have this card hint here, and as I page, the cards all move in, so you can see that there's another card happening there. So this is going to be our little intro into drivers, and then we'll dive in a little more when we go into importing. So this isn't something you guys need to try and build out and follow along with. I'm just going to explain drivers really quickly since we went over paging last week and show you what I did to add this in. So it's a single artboard with a similar paging layer to what we did last week, left and right. Bring us back down to 0 here. So I started with this full size of the artboard, and I just put this white box in the center. I took that, I duplicated it, and dragged it right 3 times, which is similar to what we did last week, just pulling the page over. And then I created a paging layer, give it this horizontal page function. And then at that point, we had 4 pages with 4 white boxes where you would scroll to them, they would come in the center, and you couldn't see that there was anything to page to. So to fix that, we pull in the drivers panel up top. And what we do with the drivers panel is everything on the drivers panel functions within an artboard. So this is the biggest difference from your animate panel to your drivers panel. So the animate panel at the bottom allows you to transition between artboards, whereas the drivers panel controls what you're doing on an individual artboard while you're touching and playing around with that artboard. So since this is all just one artboard, we start at 0 up top. So it's kind of like a timeline, but not really. It's just basically showing like distance, like linear distance over time. We come over here to 375 on the driver panel because the width of our artboard is 375 pixels, which is the width of an iPhone 6. And then our second box is centered here. And so what this allows us to do is pull in these 2 cards from the side. So you can see the blue panels are still outside of the artboard, but then our white cards are inside the artboard. So what we do is we add controls. So if I double click on this card here that's slightly in, it allows me to come up here. It's named layer 8 because I didn't name these layers very well. I can hit the plus sign, and we have all of these controls available to us. So these are anything that I can control with the driver. I'm already controlling its X position, and that's how it's appearing on the screen we're seeing. We can control where it is in Y position. We can do the height. We can do the width. We can scale it differently. The big difference with height and width are controlled from that top left corner, kind of like when you change the height or the width in the inspector panel. Scaling is controlled from the center of the object. So scaling allows you to do these nice expansive things from the center. We can change the angle and the radius. So this allows us to do like kind of the Tinder style card swipe, where if you go left or right, it starts to tilt one way or the other. You do that with an angled driver. So as you swipe to the left, the card starts to tilt out of the way. You can do stroke. Opacity is a big thing, so that as you move something, you can have an object appear out of nowhere, out of thin air, but really its opacity has changed. And then the shadow options, which I haven't found a good use for those yet, but it depends on how you design. So in order to get drivers on a page, we need to have at least one of these options somewhere in our artboard. So we need to be able to do a page, a scroll, or a drag. Vertical, horizontal, doesn't matter. You just need to have one object, at least one thing, that has one of these options selected in order to have it control something else. Otherwise, we have nothing touchable within that page. So on this page, we're paging left and right. So we have a horizontal page on. And so that motion allows us to control everything else based on where that paging motion is. Is everybody following so far? Sorry, this is getting pretty quick. So as we can see here, if I can page nicely in my preview, but if I take the driver up top of the screen here, every 375 we go, you can see these boxes kind of moving around the artboard. So you can see right here, the one on the left is pulling in pretty tight, just in time to line up. Same here, just in time to line up. And the one on the right moves over from center so that we can give that little preview hint. And then on the far right here, you can see this one on the far right blue box is actually already aligned for when it moves left, since that's its X position at this time. So layer 2 is the one in the center here. So its driver is at the very top. And this keyframe means we're centered. This one puts it to the left, and this one puts it to the right. So all we do here is, if I want to change this, is I can bump it out of the way like that. And then when I come into my paging action, we see on the far right of the screen here that it's no longer giving us the preview. But then when I come into the next one, it's pulled itself away. Put that back. Yep, sure thing.
So doing like the Tinder style card swipe thing, like why did you choose to do like one artboard with drivers versus like multiple artboards just animating shapes?
So you could do that. This in practice was more of a trying to find a selection. So one of the difficult things to do in a principal or any prototyping app is kind of say, okay, I'm going through these and I pick this one, because you have to give each one a route then, right? So suddenly, instead of just faking it and saying, I know I'm going to pick the third one, let's just choose that path. If I choose every single one, then I have to create 4 pathways, right? So in your question, if I were to choose just to animate them out, you're already choosing that one path and not allowing for very much flexibility for somebody playing around with it to get that feeling. So it depends on what you're going for exactly. If you just want whoever's touching it or whoever you're showing it to see that one exact pathway, you could definitely do animation. Just use the panel and multiple artboards. If you want them to be able to at least feel the touch, you could do it this way, or it depends on what interaction you're trying to build out, right? So both work. This one's just a little more, I guess, dense with the amount that it can do, a little more robust. With the angles too, you can choose like animate out. So like, I guess if you want to do a spring action, you'd want to do multiple artboards. But here you can, kind of keyframe it, be a little more delicate with how things move. Hopefully that answers a little bit, somewhat. So I'll pull up this example here. So yesterday we had a lot going on at work, so I decided I was going to try and re-prototype Spotify, because I really like their interface when you thumbs up on a station. That's one of the few things I enjoy about the interface. So I haven't put the song titles in yet, but you can see on the right side here, basically what I've done is you can swipe through. You can see how they get bigger and larger with shadows. You can't really get this feeling with multiple artboards. So I was able to do this, and then here there's not one leading in on the right because I only did 4. But you come through, I can thumbs up on this one. It does that and down, right? So that's the whole Spotify animation, other than not having song titles. But if I do a thumbs up on any other one, it brings me back to that one because I've routed the flow just for that specific album artwork. So that's the issue, is I could do it for each one, but the way I'd want to do it for each one is to have those individual artboards, because this thumbs up with a driver, since I'm in one artboard, is always going to say, hey, if he taps the thumbs up, go to this specific one, so you can't do multiple flows. So while we're here, let me show you guys how I built this out a little bit. This will be a good example. So this is actually twice the size of the standard iPhone. So it's just at 2x. So what happens here, we can get down there, is losing myself on the screen. We have this first artboard that is just paging. So it's a lot like what we learned last week and what we just went over today, where all we're doing is paging left and right. But I've added an opacity, a scale, and an X in drivers to each of these album artwork covers. So as I drag the driver panel over, you can see that the opacity changes. Sorry, you guys probably can't see it. The scale changes, and the X position changes so that they line up and give you that hint. So I think this is really nice because there's multiple facets to it. So for like the big data album artwork, I have it highlighted up here on the top left, and we can see I've added an X driver, I've added a scale driver, and I've added an opacity driver. So these are the three things I chose to control for this one piece. So for those unfamiliar with big data, is this first white album cover here. And so you can see initially we have it at a scale of 1. We have it at opacity of 100%. And its X position is 50. And then as we come over, it's now at a scale of 0.87, which is what I deduced Spotify's was at, right? And opacity of 75% and an X of 172. So we've moved it 122 pixels to the right. We've taken it down 25% in opacity, and we've scaled it down by 0.13. And that allows us to do that nice little lead-in for the album artwork. Does that make sense, everybody? We'll play around with this a little bit more. Drivers you can do a lot of really cool things with. Here we're just, giving that little bit of hint. And it's a nice smooth page so that you kind of lock into each of these album artwork covers. So the next thing that happens here, we get into some events, which we didn't go over too much last week. So what I've happened is, it's back. So we have a rectangle tap. So what that means is I have this rectangle here that's actually covering our thumbs up. And you can see that it has an opacity of 100% in the top left. But we can't see it. And that's because in the fill, I've taken the alpha all the way down. So here you can see if I put it all the way up, it's covering our thumbs up. So the reason I put the alpha all the way down instead of the opacity is if the alpha is at 0, you can still click on the object. If the opacity is at 0, you can't click on the object. So this is a big part of faking clickable areas or making like a hot area on a screen. You can create a rectangle, put its alpha down to 0, have it be a clickable space. If you put the opacity all the way down, you can change it in a later screen, but you won't be able to click on it on that screen. So if you have something overlaid that you want to show in the next screen, you can have that layer on top. As long as its opacity is at 0, you'll be able to click through it. So that's the big difference between the alpha channel and the opacity within Principle. So I wanted it to be a clickable space. Since the thumb that was there is a little tiny, I didn't want people to be kind of jabbing at it, trying to like something. So I created a larger clickable area using this alpha channel rectangle, which is a lot of times the reason why you'll do it. You create all these nice pieces, but you want the clickable spot to be bigger. So what I did was I put an event on this rectangle that if you tap it, it takes you to the next screen. So we're already in the event here at the bottom. So here's everything that's changing from our tap on that rectangle to the next one. So these are all gross names. So these are 3 album covers that stay the same. Our rectangle that we were just clicking on with the alpha, you see its fill is changing over time. That's because it's going from a 0 in the alpha to 100%, because I'm covering up that gray thumbs up. And you can see thumbs up green is changing its opacity because it's going from 0 opacity to 100%, so that the thumb changes to green. And that's how we achieve the thumb going from gray to green. And these all just have the default curve on them, which is iOS standard. Of course, if we want, we can pull the arm here and change it for the sake of having the 2 items be the same. I'm going to leave them as default. We can also select the 2 and change them both at the same time. So if I wanted them to instead be ease both, as long as we have all the points on these selected, we can change the curve on both at the same time. And of course, any of these properties you can click and drag here. You can pull the curve, or you can manually enter. So I'm going to set these both back to default. So in future panels, we have a lot more going on. So on this next one, we just have it come up, and then we have an auto channel. So last week we reviewed the possible events pretty quickly. What I have happening here is something called improv, which is just my shorthand for improving this channel. And we can see we have a opacity happening and a spring happening on the scale. Because I wanted the box to kind of appear, like with a separate curve, a little faster, and then stay in. So I changed the tension and the friction here. Typically, I think it's at somewhere around 381 and 20. So you can see the curve on this spring is a little more extreme, where it'll kind of bounce in, shake back, and come forward. I just wanted it to come in and gently rest where it was, because that's what Spotify has it do. So I had changed the animation to 300, and I think it was 30. So you can kind of see on your curve there, it'll come up a little bit past where it was, and then find its final resting place pretty quick, so that the animation happens in a faster amount. If I were to change this to something way more extreme, yeah, let's do this. We can kind of test this animation here. So since this is happening on this auto event, I'm going to select this artboard. Yeah, it's already going. So as you come in here, you see it do that spring action, and then it moves on to the next stuff. So you can pretty drastically change how your app is functioning just based on that. Let's see. So now that I brought it back in, we come in, we see it just pops up. Feels pretty smooth compared to the other shaky one, but depends on what you're going for. So the next few boards are all just auto events, where I have these dots happening. And all I've done here is adjusted the scale on them. So our animate panel at the bottom, these are all just called layer, and we have a scale property happening. I've taken it and I've shortened it to 0.15 of a second. The default is 0.3. And then I've put them as an ease both, which is just a standard in principle for all my layers, so that as they switch to the next panel, because the layers are named the same, they ease in and out of having a 1.3 scale on them back to just a 1. So that's how I created those paging dots. And I've just repeated that twice, so it loops through that twice automatically, because you can see all the events up top are all auto, so they're all the same over and over and over again. And then we come in here with our check mark. And what we've done here is I've had the Y position ease both, so that's why you kind of see it drop into the screen a little bit slower, which we can see over here. Can't get it all on the screen. So we see how it kind of folds into itself. That's because we have this ease both happening on the Y. And we have this long pause on the radius here, allowing it to have a little more time on screen. So that's me rebuilding Spotify.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
How long did this take you to complete?
The Spotify thing? So it's just for what I have here. I worked on it for like 30 minutes yesterday. So it was mostly trying to figure out what album artwork I wanted to put into it. But I'm not including that time in that. I don't know. When you're able to look at something, it's a little easier because I was able to have a reference. I think if I was building this myself, it would have taken longer. But instead, I was listening to music, and I kept liking things, so now my playlist is all messed up. Just to review the animation over and over. Yeah, it's not too bad, especially here since we're working in one screen. As soon as you build out that background, you're basically done. And then you're just reusing components. So it's a lot of auto events and just duplicating. So anytime I do an auto event, I take that event from here, I go auto, and I drag it back onto itself so that it's easily duplicated. Because for me, you can duplicate the artboard, you can do anything else, but I like to pick the event, duplicate the artboard that I want it to go to, or select the artboard I want it to go to and move on. Okay. Do you have a question?
In this example, is everything that you did imported from Sketch, or did you actually add anything directly in Principle?
So, good question. The only things that are from Sketch, I made the thumbs up. That's green. I built that in Sketch. And then I took a screenshot, so this is just a screenshot in the background, and I blanked out the album artwork using a gradient in Sketch to match it. Other than that, all the texts and all the bubbles and everything are actually built in Principle. For me, that was just easier than going back out into Sketch and importing. So if I come in here to this box, you see that this is actually just called layer 2 and layer 3. These are just two rectangles that I put radiuses on. And then I put them in a group so that they wouldn't separate from each other. And I animated that group so that it was one component. So everything was just done right in Principle. This box just has an opacity on it. And is a size that I thought looked similar to what they have. So for me, it's easier to stay within the one tool. You can import pretty quickly from Sketch, or drag and drop right from Sketch. But it depends on the functionality. Basically, unless it's too detailed, I'll probably try to do it in Principle. But of course, that's all what you're used to, what you're best at, personal opinion. Everybody doing okay? Okay, is everybody on the Slack channel? So I put a couple files out there. If you're not on Slack, I can airdrop them to you pretty quickly, if you have airdrop. I put this demo file out there for something I wanted to review this week for importing from Sketch. So we'll move on to importing some more high fidelity things or importing from Sketch. So I put both the PRD that I've made and the Sketch file are available. Yes. What's the computer name? Oh yeah, there. So what I've done is created a app for the web group, right? As though they would need one ever. We're in the time of native iOS apps. So we've created a launch screen, home screen, which then turned into events because I named it before I started creating it. A menu on our events panel, menu for the About Us panel, and an About Us screen. So our spacing got a little messed up here at some point. That's weird. Yeah, it looks like it's just freaking out on my screen. So I try to go through and be diligent with my naming of my layers on this sketch file for the most part. There are probably a few that went by the wayside, just so that when we import it into Principal, they all link up nicely. So we can actually see in our launch screen here, the background is named header back, because this is the same background I used, if you can imagine, in the header. So I've called it header back. And the reason that I would do this is so that when I come into Principal and I link these, it knows that this is the same shape. So it'll make it taller and shorter based on the name. Right? So this means that I'm assuming when I come into this launch panel, I want this to go from the full length of the screen to just being at the very top of the screen. Same thing for when the menu appears. I want it to go from being just at the top, taking over the whole screen. And by default, we'll see how it animates that layer, as well as the other ones we have in here, just based on the names. So we're not going to do much to this in Sketch other than have it open so we can import into Principal. And review a couple of the tenets of importing from Sketch. So in here, I put a nice shadow over our organizers' faces. And the reason I did this wasn't because it's a really cool look. There it is. Didn't want to show when I was that close. The reason I did this is show that this is multiple layers with a mask. So I put a circle mask on these images, and then I put a shadow over that. So we can see here we have Sean with all of his initials. And then we have the image, we have the mask, and I put a shadow on the whole group. And what will happen when we import this into Principal is it can't handle this kind of file. So it's going to flatten this. Any individual layer, it'll try and pull it into the best of its ability as that layer with all the components you have in Sketch, but there are certain things it can't do. And these shadows and these masks are one of those things that it can't do. So what it's going to do is it'll take it and it'll flatten it down to just this top layer here where we have the folder, and it'll leave it as the image with the shadow, but it'll have been flattened. So this is just an example of something that we would need to do in Sketch. We could potentially do this in Principal by creating a group with a round radius, putting a shadow on it there. And in that sense, it would be a scalable item. And here it'll be a flattened item that we can't scale. Thankfully, we don't want to scale Sean's face too much, so we can just leave it how it is. So one of the other things that we can do to make our file ready to import to Principal is decide what we want to create as flattened groups and what we want to leave to import as individual layers. So as I was saying, when we have this open and we import to Principal, it'll take every single layer it can, other than things it has to flatten. But maybe we don't want all those layers in Principal. The artboard can get real busy real fast. Maybe we know exactly what we want to animate. In this instance, maybe we're just animating this hamburger menu, and we don't actually need any of these other pieces to be separate. What we'd want to do is come into our layers on the side, and anything we have happening here, like all these events, say this upcoming events layer, past events, we select these for where you could put them in a group, and we call them do not animate, and then put an asterisk. So anything with an asterisk on it will get flattened on import in principle. So this makes it really easy to clean up your layers. The one thing that will happen is if you have these layers grouped in and flattened in one instance, but then you have them all separated in another, they won't auto-animate because all the layer names won't be there. So you have to decide which way you want to play it. So if you're going to flatten something, you got to make sure it's flattened everywhere, or that you're willing to manually go in and animate those layers later on without it doing any default work for you. Any questions on prepping our files? So I'm actually going to undo this, so hopefully you guys haven't done that. If you have, just undo it. Just because we do want to animate some of these layers. So all we need to do to import from Sketch is have this file open. So if you have more than one Sketch file open, it'll do whichever one you opened first. So whichever one is like the primary window. And if you have multiple artboards or multiple pages, I guess, whichever page you're on is the one it's going to import from. So basically, first file open, the thing on top. So let me open a new principal window. Back over. So I have this new principal file. Nothing's happening yet. Does everybody have these two things available? And all we do is we have this import button at the top. Dun-dun-dun. Click import. And we get the right name of our sketch file. It's called demo3. We choose how much we want it to scale our assets by. Basically, if you use Sketch, the export button in the bottom right allows you to choose the scale that you export your assets at. This is giving us the same option. We'll select ×2 by default. We'll click import. And boom, we're working in principle with our sketch file. We can see all the names are the same, and it pretty much looks just like we're in Sketch still. So it's pretty cool. Yep.
So my preview window is going behind the window. Is there a way to get it to always kind of stick right above the working panel?
In view, you have picture-in-picture and side-by-side. So you can choose those. Yep. Sometimes if you're working on something that's wider, like a full website mock-up or a portrait version of a phone or a tablet, it's a lot easier to have it on a separate screen. All right, so one of the first things I want to do.
So mine's saying could not connect when I'm trying to import into Principal.
What version of Principal are you running? Did you download it, like last week? It's interesting, yeah. Yeah. The only thing I know to do is close it out and try it again. But yeah. If not, the PRD file is also on Slack. So in our menus here, we can see that I've created 2 different versions of menu. Basically, what I'm trying to do is say, you're in the menu. The bold is where you're at currently. Where else would you like to go? That's why I created a couple of them. So all I want to do is put my events menu next to my events page. So I'm just going to drag my layer on the left-hand side to reorder it. You can drag any of these around wherever you want. I just want to put them in a certain order because in my mind that's how the flow works. So all I'm going to do to show some of the tenets of Sketch is select my overall layers. I'm not going to select any components of these. I'm just going to click on Launch, create an event called Auto, click it over to my Events panel. I'm going to click on Home, create an event called Tap, put it over my events menu, and do the same thing all the way down, just so that we can see some of the basic functionality of how it's going to auto-animate without us having to do anything. Before we get too far into it. So there's a lot that we'll want to manually change here. I'm going to reset it back to the beginning. It's going to auto-animate before I even can drag it bigger. So another hot tip here is we have this go back to the beginning button up top, but you can also use W. So W on your keyboard will reset your preview back to the beginning of your animation. So as soon as I come onto the preview panel, you can see our auto event happens, and that header goes up. And that's because we named them the same, right? They're all called header back, even though that's not the appropriate name. The web group logo disappears because it's not on the next artboard. Everything else appears right away, because this animation is actually happening on our home artboard. And since that text is behind it, you can see the text appears right away behind it. And everything else that doesn't exist on the first one just kind of pops in. Like our header, our cell phone carrier named Bryan Rules. If I tap on this, since I made this event on this one anywhere, see it's called Home Tap over here on the left. So this means if I tap anywhere on this screen, it'll take us into the menu. So obviously we would just want it to be on the hamburger menu touch, but for the sake of showing some of the auto animation with the layer names, I named it that. If we actually go back a screen, check out the hamburger icon. Since I use the same layers names there, it just does this crazy flip-flop thing and kind of swirls into place. If I click here, kind of get the same thing. It does some weird funky thing in the top left for the X going back to the hamburger menu. I don't know what it's doing there. But it's really nice with that header expanding and contracting based on the size. And of course, you could build that out very easily in principle. And we have the same thing happening here. So it's pretty cool that we can get that much done just by importing a file, because we named our layers appropriately for the most part. We'll see. So that's pretty cool. At least I think it's cool. So the same thing happens with if you drag and drop files in. So you can drag and drop files. You can export from Photoshop, export from Sketch, and drag and drop in. As long as they're named the same, you're good to go. Do you have a question, Sean? Oh, yeah, it is very cool. You know, Matt's looking at me like, dude, I don't really use Sketch. This isn't as cool as it seems. So I'm just going to show you guys what I ended up doing with this file so that we can move a little faster and get into some of the next things. So we can see how a lot of the stuff auto-animates here. What I ended up doing with this file was just adding a few more little nice things to make it feel a little bit better. Let me actually, so here I'm going to drag this off so we can get this full screen. We'll zoom in a little bit. Yeah. So I'm going to hit W to go back. See, look at that. Nice little spring action. Zips up, right? So what I've done is I made this scrollable, which we learned about last week. You can see that there's an opacity up top, which I actually put on the layer in principle. So I imported it with the 100% opacity. I changed it in principle. And we see that sticks up top, right? So that's pretty cool. And now we have another similar header coming, and it bumps it out of the way. This is all stuff that we were able to animate in principle, which is a pretty nice feature. Our hamburger icon, when we imported it and it was auto-animating, it was doing all this crazy loop-to-loop and stretching and squashing and doing weird stuff we didn't want it to do, right? It was just, it worked. It was pretty nice if you're doing a quick mock-up. But here, I've added a nice little spring action to it, right? So it's a lot smoother. And what I had to do to achieve that was actually just delete the import X I had, copy the hamburger menu from one of the other screens, pull it in, and then detail out the animation here, which we'll take a look at in a moment. So you can also, I don't know if we also saw, I did a weird spring animation for all the text coming in from the top here. So it feels pretty nice. It's not too wild. Select About Us. Brings us into the web group, which I stole the content from their meetup page. And here we have the same thing with our headers kind of staying in place. Bumps it out of the way. We go through. Yeah, it's Adam with a bagel, and he's passionate about bagels. I was really hoping he would be here to see that. But yeah, apparently Sean likes tacos. Adam likes carb circles, and Kevin is just all about the community. So that's what we have there. So I also changed it so that there's actual hotspots to click on. So here, if I hit the X, it brings us back into the About page. I can click on the About Us too. And if I click on Events, it loops us back into the Events page. So these are all just layering events. Now let's go back over, take a look at what I actually did here. So to get that initial launch screen, pull it next door, where it does this nice spring action and up. I recreated the launch panel 2 times. On this first one, we can see in the layers panel, we have our Columbus Web Group logo, but it's at a scale of 0. So if I look at my Animate panel, that's probably up, it's just way down there. We can see the options are for opacity, scale, and X and Y. So these are the 4 variables that Principal has detected are changing from one event to the next. So I took these 3, the X, Y, and scale, gave them a spring of 100, friction of 18, because again, I don't know, I'm not a fan of I like spring action, but I don't like when it's like, whoa, whoa, it's, it reminds me of the 3D from the 90s, like when they do on Friday nights where you had to wear the red and blue glasses and they're shoving things in your face. That's what too much spring animation reminds me of. So here, we just have a nice spring in, and then it eases up. I don't know. The internet eats this stuff up. That's why I say it. They don't. So this is just an auto event. So that just means as soon as I hover on it, it happens, which you can see here as soon as I come to this page, it occurs. We have another auto event, which is just doing the red background, animating up. And then the final auto event here has a few functions happening. We have our logo changing its Y position because it moves up with that red header layer. And you can tell in the animation it fades out. So to see it again here, see it moves up with it in time and fades. So that was achieved by putting this opacity on it as well as this Y layer and matching that to the header back layer. You can see these have the same animations on them, and that's so that they move together. It gives the appearance of moving together because they have the same animation. They have the same curve for their ease, so they appear to move together. These ones all have an opacity, so this is our hamburger menu, our phone stats up top, and the word events at the top. So with these, I didn't want them to appear until the logo and the header had gone to the top. So all I did was I took them, gave them the same property, which I really like the ease both instead of the default property. It just feels good because it comes in slow, it ends slow. So you kind of get that nice fast animation in the middle. And I pulled them over here to 0.25 seconds in so that most of our animation of the header moving up and the logo disappearing would be done before they appear. So I could put them over here. And if we come back and take a look at what that feels like, you can kind of see everything at the top is already there as the logo is going up. So it's a small detail. It's easy to fix, and it feels a lot better. So It's just selecting them all, dragging them over, and then suddenly they appear just after the logo's passed them. All right. So to some people, I guess it matters. I really like it, but I hope you guys do. So the next things I did was I took our hamburger menu and I duplicated it over here because I deleted the X that I'd imported. And I also created a scrolling group for our content on this page. So it's a lot like what we did last week, where I took all the content that exists in here. I took our events, our upcoming events header, and our past events header. I hit Command-G or that button at the top to put them in a group. And then I gave them a vertical scroll action. So now when we're on this page, we can scroll. I'll bring it back over here. So the subheaders here for past events and upcoming events, what I did with those was actually drivers. So at our 0 position here at the top, we have 2 Ys available. So I took the past events header and the upcoming events, and I just said, okay, I want to change the Y position. So I want to take where they are now, and that'll be my initial setting for them. And then I scrolled along until the next one bumped into it. And I said, okay, now upcoming events can change its Y position. And then I came along to where I wanted the past events header to sit, and I put another keyframe there. And then I came along and said, okay, here's the end of where I need it to stay there. So basically what you're doing, if I delete this one, we can do the past events header real quick together. So I'm going to go back to 0. And we'll delete this guy. So we start. I put a Y position on this past events header here. And so this is where we want it on the frame. So again, we have to remember drivers are animating within this single artboard. So we're taking their location or how they look within one artboard and manipulating it. So we have past events in the right spot. And as I move this over, we see that here's where they bump, but we don't want it to stay there. Right about there. A little bit further. So here's probably where we want to put our next Y position, because here's where we want it to stick at the top. So next thing we can do is continue dragging. I'm going to zoom out on the screen a little bit so we can see where the bottom is, until our scrolling layer gets up to the bottom. And now we can see that our past events is now past our main events header. So if I come in the preview, it just scrolls up underneath. So what I do is I take the past events layer, and I'm just going to use Shift and the down arrow. Put it back down where we want it. Right there. And you can see by moving it, it's added a keyframe for me in the drivers panel up top. So now when I come back over and scroll, you can see it's staying right there because we gave it 2 Y positions to hold between these as the scrolling happens. So it's just telling it, okay, your Y position is going to be this instead of moving with the scroll function. So that's how we were able to achieve that header bumping. Does that make sense to everybody? Following along? Any questions about that?
So how did you go from having it like grouped with the scrolling function to then being ungrouped and moving on its own?
So that's a great question. It's actually still grouped with the scroll, which is why if I don't give it an exposition, it would move with the scrolling function. So within our layers, on the left here, we're manipulating this one called past event, and it's within this scroll function. And this layer called scroll, is the one that has the scrolling vertically on it. And then past event and upcoming event groups are the ones that are being manipulated. So we could, alternately, we could have separated these from the scrolling group and just faked their scrolling, saying that as you scroll, this one moves up until here. Get the timing right. Exactly. And not only that, but principle by default, you see how it bumps with it on the right here? Like if I push it up, it moves the same, and as you pull down, which is a feature of iOS, right? So, you can always, it gives you that hint of there's nothing else here and pulls you back down. So principle does that by default. If you were going to try to do that by separating these two header layers, you would have to animate that yourself. Yeah, unless you're going to keyframe that, it doesn't make sense.
Okay, so you can like click into a layer and give like a sub layer or subgroup animating properties, and then that would trump whatever the folder is programmed to do.
Right.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. So there is hierarchy, but it's basically like putting an important tag on something. It overrides everything else. So here, I want to come in and just show you guys one more thing with this. I'm sure you all have the PRD file. If you don't, we can get it to you. So you can kind of dig around and mess with this file a little bit. So this is all the animation that happens when we tap on the hamburger menu. So you get from the events screen into the events menu. So there's quite a bit happening, you can see, but a lot of it's just default stuff. So we have our header back, which is that big red rectangle again, and all that's doing is changing its height and its X and Y position. The reason it's changing X and Y is, of course, because they're manipulated from the top left corner, so it wants to make sure it stays in the top left corner. So I've put these out to, I think, 0.5 to fit in with how all the other animation feels, so it's always the same time. And then up top here are our labels for the actual events, the names in the menu. So these are all just doing a spring action, 100, friction 18. If we're taking a look, we can see I'm doing the same like little amount of spring again. So you can kind of tell what I like to design with. We have our hamburger top, our hamburger mid, and our hamburger bottom. So these are the different layers of our hamburger menu. And we can see that the middle one only has an X position, because all I'm doing with that is taking it, dragging it off screen, and then taking it and dragging it back on screen. So it only gets one option here, whereas the hamburger top and hamburger bottom, we're changing X, Y, the width of them because I made them slightly longer, and then the angle. And then all of our other things here, which are our content from our first screen, just have a default animation on them. We didn't really need them to do much. So if we come back out and take a look, so one thing we can see between these, change the drivers here, is up top on our home screen, it's probably pretty hard to see, we have all of the options from our menu up here. So these options are what our menu is on the next screen. And this is how we get them to fall into that layer. So we give them a position on the screen previous, and then we animate them in the animate panel to have that spring action falling in from the top. So that's how they fall in so nicely for us. We can see on our menu that here's that hamburger mid, just kind of hanging out to the left of the artboard off screen there. And that's how it animates out. And then we can also see that underneath this menu, we have our content. And I did that so that when the menu comes back up, goes down, the content remains the same, and there's no white screen. Sometimes if you're animating out of a layer, since it's lessening its size, like it's getting smaller on that layer with nothing under it, you would see a white screen for a moment before the content reappears when it gets to the next artboard. So you kind of fake that the content's already there. Here's an area where you could use that flattened image from Sketch rather than all these layers, because you just need to fake that the content's there. They're not going to interact with that content. They're going to interact with the content in the next artboard. That's pretty cool, and that's how we got this little animation here. So all those little things we did in that panel and duplicating some content allowed us to get that motion. So it didn't really take that much time since we had layers from Sketch. The one thing I did have to change was pulling that hamburger menu from one of the other panels so I could really do a detailed animation of it here. I have 2 more examples for you guys, and then we'll get into a break and some free time. These ones will go pretty quick, so if you have questions on these, just let me know. So Reddit came out with a new native app. I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of Reddit. But it's pretty nice. So I always just like to download things to play with them. I was a big Alien Blue fan, and the new Reddit app is, it's nice. I get it. One of the things I do like is that they have this thing when you click into a specific subreddit that the header is a little larger and tells you like the active users and this and that. And it gives you like a little profile circle. So I named mine Circles and Circles and just put a bunch of circles together. So all I'm doing here is I recreated what basically it looks like when you come into a subreddit. I didn't do their animation exactly. And then I created scrollable content on the page. So I just added a bunch of gray boxes down here at the bottom. So a single artboard, a lot of layers, and then in our preview window you can see our blue header starts to shrink, our content fades out, and our text changes to white, and then we can continue to scroll. So using drivers, this is kind of how earlier we took the demo from last week, and I showed you guys the event for scroll begin and scroll end, and how to create a smaller header using that. This is a way kind of that you could do it with drivers. I really liked how they had this animation in the new Reddit app, so I decided I wanted to make something similar. So yeah, again, single artboard, and we just added drivers to individual layers. So as we move along, let me open some of these up so we can see them. So everything is in this group here. So we have a bunch of text layers. We have all of our circles in this group in the center. And then we have our header layer. So we can see in our drivers at the top that the height of this one changes, which is our blue layer, as we move the driver along. So I just said, okay, change the height from here to here. And at this point, I want it to stay this height. So we can actually come over into our inspector. On the right layer. It's crazy with the zoom, sorry guys. And if I want to make this height longer instead of shorter, for some reason, you'll see as we scroll, it becomes longer now instead. And then it'll push back up to its original height, just because we haven't set a second keyframe in that layer. So I can make it longer and then say at the end of the scroll, I want to make it really tiny. We can come in here, pick layer, make it go all the way to the top. And just like that, we've created multi-motion in our header layer. So you're just setting frames based on the location of the scroll function, right? So it becomes longer and goes to the top. Not that that's pretty ugly, but to show how it works, right? Let's back out of that. So then on the text layers and the circle, all we're doing is manipulating opacity, saying when they get to this point, go to an opacity of 0. When they get here, start to fade it. So at this point, we start fading the opacity of all those layers together. And then I just have a secondary text layer that fades in from 0 to 100. That's white instead of black. So pretty basic stuff for drivers, but it adds a lot, and it's a pretty cool animation. I was doing that, and I thought it was pretty cool because some of their subreddits have like nice detailed pictures behind them. Other ones just have a standard header. I think it depends on if somebody in their community is a designer or not. But it was pretty neat functionality. And the last one, for anybody who watches Rick and Morty, I was doing this yesterday. So this is using drivers, and so I photoshopped Rick out of this photo. This is one of my favorite episodes. And basically all the big head guys, their eyes, if you can see, they follow him back and forth across the stage. So all I did was I took him and I did a horizontal drag. So it's a pretty simple thing. All of these groups on the left are just eyes that I created in principle. So I just photoshopped them out. I took Rick. I put a horizontal drag here. You can see in the top left on him. If we wanted to, we could put a vertical drag on too. But since he doesn't have feet, it doesn't really make sense to do that. And manipulated all of these eye layers using drivers. So the eyes are just all paired together. So like on the main head, you can see I've selected this group, and it's selecting both of his pupils. And then in drivers, I just gave him a far left action, a center action, and a far right. So this is pretty simple looking, compared to the other drivers. This is all just in the middle. You can see some have Ys, some don't. Depends on if I wanted them to arc over or not. And then as you drag them back and forth, there's something cool. So that's a pretty simple, fun thing to do using drivers. I just thought that'd be silly, so I did that. Cool. So we'll take a quick break and then get into some hands-on stuff. If you guys have questions, we can do questions. Okay. Any questions on drivers and importing? We'll have plenty of time, so if you guys have more. Yeah.
In general, what can you export from principal file types?
Good question, Kevin. So there's a few things you can do. Let me pull this guy back up. So you can export GIFs natively from, where did I put that cable? Oh, it's attached from Principal. You can export .mov files, which are a lot cleaner. The GIFs, for some reason, get compressed funny. You can then, if you have Principal Mirror on an iOS device, you can just send a PRD file to somebody. What I was doing last week with the beginning presentation was export for Mac, which is up here in the menu. And this can open natively on anybody that has a Mac. They don't have to have Principal. You can just send them this file, and they can click through it. Same with the PRD file. The iOS app, Principal Mirror, is free, so they can download it, play with it on their phone. If you're working on your own stuff and you want to actively see it on your phone, don't download iTunes. Let me quit this and get back to where I was. Of course I want to quit. So I can open Principal Mirror on my phone, and if I have this open, we can see that the screen that's being previewed is also being previewed on my phone because I have a cable attached. So if I restart this app, it launches, and I can actually scroll with it here, play with the menu, and that's how I was playing with it here, and I realized the touch area on my hamburger menu was way too small. So that's why I gave it a larger one. So you can see a lot of the nice animation here. The one thing you do want to be careful of is any auto animations or hover on, hover off animations. Those work really well for full websites, where you can do like hover on a button and the button changes color or has a shadow, something like that. Hover states don't work in touch, right? Because you're either touching or you're not. So any animations like that are going to be pretty weird when you put them on the phone. So just be conscious of what states you're using, and if somebody's going to be touching it. If you're just faking it to record a video, have at it. But you just need to be conscious of who's going to see it and how they're going to interact with it. So on here, it's pretty cool because I can use it like a full app. You know, it looks nice. So that's one really cool thing we can do. So yeah, no code, but just GIFs, movies. You can export the files for Mac and then for the phone. And again, as I said last week, sometimes Google Drive has issues with them. So Dropbox, iCloud, whatever you're using, email them. You can open them through email and then select it as an option to open it. So it's pretty cool. But this is the really nice way. It's just to be hardwired in and play with it as you're designing something. There's not a lot of functionality for like getting out of it, so you have to control it all from the computer. To answer your question. Yeah. Cool. All right, so we'll take a quick break and then we'll jump back in. Sorry, this took a lot longer than I planned on it. So.